Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I call this business meeting to order. It's good to be with all of you today. And we thank everyone for the work that they've done in anticipation of this markup, and members and the staff as well. Today we're going to be voting, as you know, on 5 pieces of legislation. The Providing Reliable, Objective, Verifiable Emissions Intensity and Transparency Act of 2023, or Prove It. Also, the Good Samaritan Remediation of Abandoned Hardrock Mines Act of 2023, the Reuben E. Lawson Federal Building Act of 2023, a bill to designate the United States Courthouse located at 500 West Pike Street in Clarksburg, West Virginia, as the Irene M. Keeley United States Courthouse, and a bill to designate the federal building located at 300 East 3rd Street in North Platte, Nebraska, as the Virginia Smith Federal Building. Before we do this, though, I want to take a moment to briefly discuss these bills. First bill that we'll consider is better known as the Prove It Act. This bipartisan legislation was introduced by Senator Coons, my fellow wingman from the first state, and by Senator Kramer, a respected member of our committee. It's also co-sponsored by a number of Democrat and Republican members of our committee. The Prove It Act directs the Department of Energy to conduct a study that compares the climate impacts of making certain products in the United States with the climate impacts of making those same products in other countries. As it turns out, because the United States is increasingly generating clean electricity, and because many of our factories use modern methods and pollution controls, a lot of our domestic production has lower greenhouse gas emissions than the production in other countries. For example, if you make an aluminum using electricity from renewable energy, the process is going to be a lot cleaner than making aluminum using electricity generated by burning coal. We also see this with other products such as steel, such as cement and concrete. In a world where many countries are trying to cut greenhouse gas emissions to slow climate change, having cleaner products can also give us a competitive trade advantage. For example, the European Union has adopted a so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will soon place a tariff on imports of products that were produced with relatively high greenhouse gas emissions. But what's missing is solid data on the average greenhouse gas emissions in different countries. The Prove It Act aims to fill that data gap and make that information publicly available. We expect this information to boost the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing and help incentivize cleaner production in the United States and overseas, so that this is a win-win for our climate and for our economy. Next, we will consider the Good Samaritan Remediation of Abandoned Hardrock Mines Act of 2023, a bipartisan bill authored by Senators Heinrich and Risch. To date, more than 1/4 of all senators have signed on to this bill, evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. The Good Samaritan Act, known to some as Good Sam, aims to eliminate a long-standing barrier to the cleanup of abandoned mine sites. Federal agencies have identified over 140,000 remnants of advanced hard rock mines, of which more than 60% pose safety and environmental hazards. Fortunately, organizations that have no legal or financial ties to these abandoned mines, true Good Samaritans, want to volunteer to clean up these sites. However, such organizations have limited options to do so under current law, since they would have to assume undue liability to perform such cleanups. Good Sam creates a pilot program that would allow a limited number of cleanup efforts to move forward with conditional liability protections. Projects that qualify under the program must meet stringent environmental protection and public health requirements. All projects must also undergo a NEPA review, and owners or operators of mines are not eligible for the program. I want to thank our colleagues, especially I want to thank Senator Heinrich and Senator Risch for their efforts in crafting this legislation and working with our committee to improve it over the last 2 sessions. I know a number of members of our committee have co-sponsored this legislation, and we thank you for your input to it. Finally, we'll vote on 3 bills naming buildings owned by the General Services Administration. We will vote on those bills en bloc. First, those 3 naming bills sponsored by Senators Warner and Kane of Virginia would rename the Richard H. Poff Federal Building in Roanoke, Virginia as the Reuben E. Lawson Federal Building. Mr. Lawson dedicated his life, as some of you may recall, his life and his career to fighting against segregation. Second naming bill is sponsored by our ranking member, Senator Capito, along with Senator Manchin, and this legislation would name the United States Courthouse located at 500 West Pike Street in Clarksburg, West Virginia, as the Irene M. Keeley United States Courthouse, after the first woman appointed as a judge for the U.S. District Court in the Northern District of West Virginia. Finally, we have a bill from Senator Ricketts and Senator Fisher to name the federal building located at 300 East 3rd Street in North Platte, Nebraska, as Virginia Smith Federal Building, after Virginia Smith, the first woman elected to Congress in the state of Nebraska. With that, let me recognize our ranking member, Senator Capito, for any opening remarks she'd like to make, and we're happy to be with you today.
Thank you, Chairman Carper, and thanks for holding our first business meeting of 2024. I want to thank you and your staff for preparing the amendment in the nature of a substitute for S. 2781, the Good Samaritan Remediation Abandoned Hardrock Mines Act of 2023. We had a productive hearing on this in 2022 on this very legislation, which would, as the chairman mentioned, establish a 7-year pilot program and permit 15 Good Samaritan remediation projects of abandoned mines on federal, state, tribal, and private lands. Common Sense program would provide liability protection to Good Samaritans that want to undertake important work to improve water quality, and I support this bill. Today, we will also be considering the 3 GSA naming bills, including one I am very proud to sponsor. S. 3570, which I introduced with Senator Manchin, would designate the federal courthouse on Pike Street in Clarksburg, West Virginia, is the Irene M. Keeley United States Courthouse. Judge Keeley earned her law degree from West Virginia University College of Law in 1980. President H.W. Bush nominated her to the federal bench in 1992, and she was confirmed by the Senate, get this, unanimously. Yeah, those were the days, weren't they? She went on to serve on the United States District Court of the Northern District of West Virginia for 30 years as the state's first female judge, including as chief judge for 7 years. Judge Keeley took senior status in 2017 and inactive status in 2022. Designation of the Clarksburg Federal Courthouse in her honor is a fitting tribute for the decades of dedication and service to her state and country, all while being a very inspiring role to young women and even older women like me and lawyers across West Virginia. Today, we also consider Senator Ricketts' legislation to designate the federal building in North Platte, Nebraska, after former Congresswoman Virginia Smith, as well as legislation to redesignate the federal courthouse in Roanoke, Virginia. I urge my colleagues to support all of these bills. However, I must express my opposition to the final bill on today's agenda, S. 1863, the Prove It Act. The committee has a well-established record over the last several years of finding common ground on climate legislation, and I'm proud of our work. The chairman and I have partnered to advance such bills as the Future Act, the Use It Act, the Nuclear Energy Innovation and Modernization Act, and the Infrastructure and Investment in Jobs Act. And now we are working together to get the Advance Act, which is our nuclear bill, signed into law. We have also collaborated on many non-climate environmental bills that will have benefits for ecosystems across this country, such as the Chesapeake Wild Act and the America's Conservation Enhancement Act. These are conservation initiatives and aspirations that we share, and I know that the chairman wants to extend these as we move through the rest of the year. I have the greatest respect for the bill's sponsors, but this bill does not set up a climate policy I am in support of. Advocates have named different reasons for supporting this bill: study emissions on behalf of Europe, prepare for carbon tariffs, or facilitate a domestic carbon tax. All three of these rationales concern me. The substitute amendment we are considering today directs the Department of Energy to report to Congress on the average emissions of 22 industrial sectors and to compare them to those of other countries, from American allies to competitors, including China. It is vague on the authorities to be used by the department to conduct this review. It enables DOE to add additional categories at will and allows the agency to cite where and why they found a lack of data and to pressure companies to disclose. While some have stated this effort is to align, and the chairman alluded to this, align with the European Union's CBAM, or Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, prove it goes beyond the categories covered by the EU for reasons unexplained. I think decades of history proves that America shall not follow Europe's environmental and trade policies, which have left the continent reeling in the face of supply disruptions due to Russia, dealing with higher energy and living costs, and suffering a less vibrant and competitive economy than we have right here in the United States. The argument that the bill is just a study also does not resonate with me. We have a number of repositories of greenhouse gas emissions data already being collected by the federal government, and specifically the EPA, which we have jurisdiction over, such as the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Rule, something belatedly acknowledged in the amendment that I believe Senator Kramer will be offering in the nature of a substitute later on today. So I already find the redundant number of sources we have to be confusing. So before we consider establishing yet another greenhouse gas data set or study to burden American industry and potentially confuse policymakers and the public, we need to better understand the ones we already have. But even if we did that, I still have concerns with establishing a carbon intensity study, in large part because what have I lived through as the lead Republican opposing the EPW portions of the Inflation Reduction Act. Even if we were to all agree that providing a study at this point is the only goal and not the imposition of a carbon tax or tariff, we have seen through the Inflation Reduction Act how innocuous data collection responsibilities can later be weaponized to implement damaging partisan policies, including taxes. So I'll give you an example. Subpart W and the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, also known as, everything has a name, MERP, is one such cautionary tale. Through the Inflation Reduction Act, Democrats transformed Subpart W from a reporting requirement to a hammer, used to nail a tax on American oil and gas industry to be paid by the American consumers. The EPA was directed to update Subpart W, a reporting framework that has existed for over a decade, and then use it to set the tax. I hear regularly from stakeholders now, even ones who did not oppose the MERP at the time of its enactment, who say the fee needs to be repealed because the EPA has now revised Subpart W and inflated the emissions reported under that program to impose an unjustified fee. Well, all I keep thinking is I tried to tell you that at the time. I see the exact thing happening here with the study and reports generated by the Prove It Act. I noticed that the revised bill now includes a clarification that states that nothing in the Prove It Act itself directly authorizes new taxes or fees. But that provision does not prevent Congress from imposing such a tax or tariff through future legislation, even in a partisan fashion through the reconciliation process, such as the IRA, using the studies and the reports developed by the Prove It Act. We saw how once a reporting framework exists, Democrats used that framework to impose the MERP without running up against the Byrd Rule. Believe me, we fought hard with the parliamentarians and didn't prevail. And we also saw that it was overridden, that prior savings clauses were overwritten as part of the Byrd Rule in other reconciliation provisions in the EPW title of the Inflation Reduction Act. So my question is, savings clauses are ineffective. I will offer a couple amendments to try to cure what I think are some of the worst issues with the legislation, but fear that its initial premise, construction, and significant potential costs for American households and businesses require me to oppose it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you as well. I see that a quorum is present, so let's go ahead and get started. First, I want to call up S 1863, the Prove It Act of 2023, and the Kramer Amendment in the nature of a substitute to this legislation, numbered Kramer 1. The amendment in the nature of a substitute makes several minor changes agreed to on a bipartisan basis with the bill's sponsors. As the ranking member and I have agreed, I now ask unanimous consent to use the amendment in the nature of a substitute as the base text for the purpose of the business meeting. Is there objection? Hearing no objection. Committee will use the Kramer substitute as the base text for purpose of this committee's action on the Prove It Act. Does any senator wish to offer an amendment to this legislation? No?
I think we're going to recognize Senator.
Yeah. Before we do that, would you like to just make some remarks?
Yeah, I'd like to make some remarks on the amendment.
Yeah,
in the
please
form
do.
of a
Go
substitute.
right ahead.
All
Thanks.
right. Well, thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this markup today. Now, a lot's been said about the Prove It Act, but I think I want to clarify a few things as to what the Prove It Act does, and importantly, what it does not do. And we can make up all kinds of things that are possible that aren't related to this, but the Prove It doesn't authorize many of those things. I was recently asked if Prove It would lead to EPA implementing a carbon tax. Now, if that was the bill, I'd vote no, obviously, but thankfully it's not the bill. But there's a lot of things wrong with that supposition. First of all, the EPA isn't tasked with this study, and neither this committee or that agency handles tax policy. But it's indicative of the noise that surrounds the actual substance of the legislation. So I want to reiterate what's in the bill. First, contrary to the ranking member's comments about this bill being a, quote, road to a carbon tax, I want to read the actual text. Regarding, by the way, authorities which aren't fuzzy and prohibitions which are clear as can be. Quote, nothing in this act provides any new authority to any federal agency to impose, collect, or enforce a greenhouse gas emissions tax, fee, duty, price, or charge. Right? So nothing empowers any agency to do any of these things. If it were a tax, it would be in Chairman Carper's other committee, the Finance Committee, as I said earlier. I think it goes without saying, but you'd be hard-pressed to find two states more opposed to a carbon tax than West Virginia and North Dakota, believe me. And I've got a long record of opposing a carbon tax. So this insinuation that I'd be pushing a tax on any of our manufacturers and producers is, well, it's laughable. But even if you were trying to Prove It to a carbon tax, I want to read something that supporters of a carbon tax have said about Prove It. They've said, quote, a domestic carbon fee would be applied on fuels when they enter the economy. The Prove It Act is an analysis of average product level emissions intensity data. This data is irrelevant in implementing a U.S. carbon fee, end quote. That's advocates of a carbon fee. I'm starting to talk the people on the other side here out of this, I'm afraid. Similarly, I better be careful. There is support for some sort of carbon tariff to level the playing field for American workers while punishing polluting countries like China and Russia that undercut them. But again, that's not today's bill. And if it were, it'd be in the Finance Committee. But I find it concerning that some keep talking about carbon board adjustment as if it's theoretical. In fact, I think one of the things that the ranking member said is that some people say that this is Prove It is to accommodate a European Union's carbon tax. It's not to accommodate it, it's to defend against it. The EU is already collecting data to implement their CBAM in 2026, and the United Kingdom has announced theirs will go into effect 1 year later. So this is not theoretical. This is real. These are our closest allies that are preparing a tariff against products manufactured in the United States. Multiple American products will be charged a tariff based on math that the Europeans use, and they're going to use it on us, not to help us. Prove It is an opportunity to make sure we collect our own data rather than subject ourselves to whatever Europe hits us with. Now, I don't want the steel, aluminum, hydrogen, and fertilizer producers that we represent to be hit by a European tariff without us having the data to rebut it. And the Department of Energy has a good record in this area. For example, this is a very specific and personal example. In 2019, when I got to know the French ambassador really well, the French utility company Engie, which is partially owned by the French government, canceled a contract for U.S. LNG, claiming it was dirty. Imagine that now. They had a large contract for United States liquid natural gas, but canceled it because they claimed it was dirty and instead bought that gas from Russia. From Russia. 40% greater carbon intensity than our gas. And then, of course, Vladimir Putin attacks Ukraine, and Engie got religion and came to the realization we'd rather have the clean stuff from the United States. This is why Senator Coons and I tasked DOE with doing this study. Work done by DOE and others show that the United States has a distinct carbon advantage over our competitors. DOE should compile this data from existing sources, by the way. Nobody is being forced to provide new information. That's prohibited in the bill. So DOE should compile this data to prove our American excellence. Ultimately, this is about giving credit where credit is due, and that is to the American workers who dutifully abide by the highest standards in the world. And we need to make sure their compliance isn't undercut by foreign competitors who have little to no environmental standards, never mind the equally egregious human and worker rights records of some of these players. Finally, Prove It illustrates the high tax American businesses already pay in the form of compliance costs. That's why this bill has such broad support, because American businesses have made great strides at great cost in becoming the cleanest in the world. Their innovation and investment should be accounted for, and we should use this data to make sure their interests are protected. Mr. Chairman, sometimes people question why a senator from North Dakota, an energy state like ours, would support Prove It, and I get it. Some people like cheap stuff from China and are perfectly comfortable pretending there's nothing wrong with a communist regime abusing its citizens and environment to win an economic war with the United States. But if the goal is to lessen global emissions, then the answer has to be to produce and manufacture more here in the United States of America, in the cleanest country. I'll take Bakken and Alaskan North Slope crude any day over the dirtiest product coming out of Venezuela or Russia. The same goes for mining in Wyoming and Arizona, and steel and aluminum production in Arkansas and West Virginia. So let's put the data together to make sure we stand up for the workers and businesses that we represent. I urge a yes vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those comments. Thanks very much to you and your staff for all the work that you've done on this measure. Does any senator wish to offer an amendment to this legislation?
I have an amendment at the desk. Yeah.
Yes, Senator Capito, you're recognized, please.
Thank you. This is amendment number 1, and this is in response. First of all, I want to say to my friend from North Dakota, yes, I know you don't want a border tax. I get that. I mean, you don't want a carbon tax. I get that. And if I inferred that in my statement, which I don't think I did, but if that's what you took away from it, that I understand where you are on that. You've emphasized time and again, collect our own data. Well, that's the purpose of this amendment. It addresses some of the concerns I have, and then it I think, consolidates some of the emphasis that you put on yours. It replaces the text of the bill with the direction to the EPA, which already has an inventory of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions and sinks, the 6 core categories that the Prove It Act contains. But I add in the 6 core ones that are not currently being gathered by EPA to make it the same as what's in the Prove It Act. These categories are lithium-ion batteries, hydrogen, uranium, critical minerals, solar panels, and wind turbines. The other materials covered in Prove It, from oil and gas to cement to iron and steel to plastics to fertilizers, are already addressed by the EPA in its annual inventory, which is now referenced in the amended underlying text. The EPA is the agency charged with dealing with greenhouse gas emissions, and it has published the annual inventory for years, presenting emission estimates dating back to 1990. You know, I may be skeptical about EPA's data collection and modeling, but I do think, because of what's happened with Subpart W, but before we start layering on another bureaucracy through brand new efforts and bringing in new agencies like DOE, I think we need to already work with the ongoing data collection that goes on at EPA. So as I said, when I look at existing data sources, and I'm not sure I'm being clear here, but what I'm saying is let's take it out of DOE. This amendment takes it out of DOE, puts it in the existing inventory that's very similar to what they're asking for in the Prove It Act adds in what's not already in the Prove It Act, and that inventory would stand. This inventory that is done at the EPA is done and was established to be in compliance with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and is compliant with international standards. So that's my amendment, and I ask for support.
All right, thank you for that. I think my colleagues know how much I respect.
Could I interject one other thing that my amendment
Sure.
does? I'm sorry. Yeah. My amendment also says that I have language in there that has a savings clause that does prevent the data's use for regulation and a budgetary point of order that would move it, if it were to be used, the data were to be used to put a carbon tax, and it would have to be at a 60 vote threshold rather than a 50 that is normal and a reconciliation measure. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I think our colleagues know I have great respect for our colleague from West Virginia. We work very hard every day to find consensus on all kinds of issues. And today, I'm afraid I'm going to have to oppose her amendment. The amendment would replace the text of the Prove It Act with a bill that would block virtually any EPA regulation of greenhouse gas emissions. It would also establish a new point of order for the Senate floor, prohibiting any revenue measure based on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with commodities or with products. We know that the climate crisis is causing tremendous harm to our communities and our economy today and to our planet, and it's getting worse, and it's getting worse more quickly. The last thing that Congress ought to be doing is blocking common sense measures to reduce carbon pollution. And I would urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment. Does any other senator wish to speak on Senator Capito's First Amendment? Anybody else? No? Okay. Seeing no further speakers, the question is on the approving the amendment. A roll call is requested. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Bozeman.
No.
Mrs. Capito.
Yes.
Mr. Carden.
No.
Mr. Kramer.
No.
Mr. Fetterman. No. Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. No. Ms. Lemons.
Aye.
Mr. Markey. No. Mr. Merkley. No. Mr. Mullen.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Padilla.
No by proxy.
Mr. Ricketts.
Yes.
Mr. Sanders.
Mr. Sanders is no by proxy.
Mrs. Stabenow. No. Mr. Sullivan.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No by proxy.
Mr. Wicker.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, can we get Mr. Mullen's vote once more, please?
Mr. Mullen is yes by proxy. Yeah.
Is the clerk prepared to report the roll call totals?
Yes, sir.
Would you go ahead?
The yeas are 7, the nays are 17.
Say that again one more time.
The yeas are 7, the nays are 17.
All right. The amendment is not adopted. Yeah, just double check, and we can pause. I don't recall seeing this happen before. All right, I'm going to ask the clerk to take one more shot at this.
Mr. Chairman, the yeas are 6, the nays are 13.
All right. All right, the amendment is not adopted. Does any senator wish to offer another amendment?
I have another amendment.
Senator Capito, go right
Thank you.
go
Very
right ahead.
simple. Goes to what my first, one of my concerns was. I had it in my first amendment. I'm going to try it again here. I expressed my concern about the Prove It Act being abused in a future reconciliation package to ram through a domestic carbon tax and a partisan reconciliation exercise. The clarification in the revised bill, I think, is a bit insufficient. So my amendment would raise a budgetary point of order against the use of Prove It as the basis for any revenue measure such as a CBAM or domestic carbon tax. This point of order could only be waived by a vote of 60 or more senators, not just a slim partisan majority. Any effort to use a bipartisan bill for such a purpose should require a robust bipartisan vote. I urge support.
All right. Again, I must regretfully oppose Senator Capito's. Regretful. Must regretfully oppose my valued colleague's amendment. Like the prior amendment, though, this amendment establishes a new point of order for the Senate floor that prohibits any revenue measure based on the greenhouse gas emissions associated with commodities or products. I understand that some outside groups are claiming that the Prove It Act would lead to the establishment of a carbon tax, but as we've heard, that's just not correct. The bill itself states that it does not provide any new authority for any type of fee on greenhouse gas emissions. This amendment is I'm afraid, a poison pill that would force me and many of my colleagues to vote against this bill if the amendments were adopted. And so I'm going to vote no and ask my colleagues to do that as well. Any other senator wish to comment on Senator Capito's second amendment?
If I could,
Senator Creamer.
Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I'm going to support Senator Capito's second amendment because I frankly don't think it really changes a lot. It does clarify, or emphasizes perhaps the finer point that reconciliation should not be used. You should not be able to use this data. The fact of the matter is that the substitute amendment that we're actually dealing with now already does that in the broader sense that it prohibits any agency from using any of this data for any type of a tax or a regulation. So it's just, in my view, just a narrower emphasis on the specific issue of reconciliation. So I'm supporting it.
All right, thank you. Are there other senators wishing to comment on this amendment? Hearing no further speakers, the question is now rather on the amendment. The roll call vote has been requested. Is there a second? Second. Been moved and seconded. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Bolton. Aye. Mr. Capito.
Aye.
Mr. Carter.
No.
Mr. Kramer.
Aye.
Mr. Governor. No. Mr. Brown.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. No. Ms. Lummis.
Aye.
Mr. Martin. No.
Yes, by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Ricketts. Aye. Mr. Sanders.
No by proxy.
Ms. Scottnow. No. Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No by proxy.
Mr. Wicker.
Yes, by proxy.
Chairman.
No? Is the clerk ready to report? The yeas and nays?
I'm gonna fill it in and he's gonna say it right. That's what it is.
I'm going to ask you to just take one more look at that and just repeat. All right. All right, I understand the yeas are 9, the nays are 10, and
The opposite. The
yeas are 9, and the nays are 10. All right? Say again?
You said amendment does not pass.
All right. In that case, the amendment is not adopted. Does any senator wish to offer another amendment to this legislation? Anybody?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ricketts, go right ahead.
Yes, I would like to call up Ricketts Amendment Number 1. I have several concerns with this bill, but before I get into that, you know, Mr. Chairman, I really like being on this committee.
You're
You
faithful.
know what?
and
You
you're-
know one of the reasons why I like being on this committee, right?
No,
Because
I'm
we
not.
get to talk about biofuels. And that's what my amendment talks about. So first of all, I think just in general, one of the things that we ought to do in the legislative branch is be more prescriptive with the executive branch. And as a former governor, I know that the executive branch will not do things unless the legislative branch specifically tells them what to do if they don't want to do it. And Mr. Chairman, I suspect that you recall the same sort of thing from being a former executive branch member. So one of the things I think we ought to be doing, again, is being more prescriptive. And of course, I don't have to explain to you all the dangers of using partial or unsound science as we walk through these processes. What my amendment does is determines that the Department of Energy's own Argonne National Laboratories greenhouse gases, regulated emissions, energy use, and transportation, also known as the GREET model, be used as the methodology when determining greenhouse gas emissions, specifically when we're talking about the biofuels. The GREET model considers the entire life cycle of energy sources and transportation fuels. It accounts for emissions from production, distribution, and consumption, providing a more accurate representation of the different environmental impacts of different fuels. GREET incorporates a wide range of data inputs, including energy consumption, emission factors, and technological parameters. This comprehensive data set ensures that the model captures the nuances of various transportation technologies and fuel sources. GREET has gained acceptance across industries as a reliable tool for assessing the environmental performance of transportation fuels. Its adoption by both the public and private entities enhances its status as a standard for emissions modeling. GREET has undergone rigorous peer review processes, and its methodologies have been validated through scientific studies. The model's credibility is strengthened by the involvement of experts and continuous refinement based upon feedback from the scientific community. I urge the committee to support my amendment and look forward to working with you on this issue in the future. And again, I would just say I think that this ought to be done not just for the transportation fuels, but every category that we have, we should come up with a specific model that we instruct the Department of Energy to use to calculate the emissions. And with that,
All right, thank you.
Chairman, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your amendment. And let me preface, I'm going to oppose the amendment. I want to say you've been a valued member of this committee from day one, faithful attender, and we really do. I really do. I know Senator Capito as well. I can't support you on this amendment, but let me just say The Prove It Act directs DOE to gather data and develop robust estimates for the greenhouse gas intensities of the specified products. I understand that the GREET model referred to in Senator Ricketts' amendment is a DOE model, and nothing in the underlying bill prevents DOE from using it. But I don't think we should require the Department of Energy to use a particular model by law here. And if we want to convince other nations to use our estimates, we need to make sure that the estimation methodology is on absolutely solid technical ground. I think Congress does that best by letting the technical experts make those decisions. And I'm also concerned that specifying a particular model may undermine support for this bill among those who may not agree with that model. So I'm going to have to urge our colleagues to vote no on this amendment. Does any other member wish to speak on Senator Ricketts' amendment? All right. When there are no more speakers on this amendment, let me just say the question is on the amendment. The roll call vote has been requested. Is there a second? Thank you. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Baldwin. Aye. Mrs. Capito.
Aye.
Mr. Carter.
No.
Mr. Kramer.
Aye.
Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Brown.
No by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. No. Ms. Lemons. Aye. Mr. Markey. No. Mr. Murphy. Mr. Mullen.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Deere.
No by proxy.
Mr. Ricketts.
Aye.
Mr. Sanders.
No by proxy.
Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No by proxy.
Mr. Wicker.
Yes, by proxy.
Chairman.
No. Clerk will report.
Chairman, the yeas are 10 and nays are 9.
Say it, please repeat. Please repeat what you just said.
The yeas are 10 and nays are 9.
No, I don't think that's correct. One more time. One more time, please. Does he need?
Yes, we are helping. Yes, we're helping right there. Here, sir. We're just gonna do it.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. The yeas are 9 and the nays are 10. The amendment is not adopted. Does any senator wish to offer another amendment to this legislation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ricketts, please. Go ahead.
I'd like to call up Ricketts Amendment number 2. I have concerns about the People's Republic of China and their ability to take advantage of the system to avoid following their international commitments. The PRC is not a developing nation. The PRC is the second largest economy in the world. Since 1992, the PRC's economy has grown by more than 1,000%, and its emissions have more than quadrupled. Yet the PRC has and continues to strategize and act so that they can be treated as a developing country under international multilateral agreements, including the Montreal Protocol and the UN Convention on Climate Change. We cannot allow the PRC to self-designate as a developing country to gain unfair special trade treatment that it does not deserve. The PRC needs to operate on the same level playing field as if if we are going to prove we can do it better than they can. So I look forward to working with you all on this future issue in the future, and I wish to withdraw my amendment.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Other senators wishing to speak? Okay. I think we're going to go to final, was that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All righty. Seeing no further speakers, question is now, I think, on final passage. I move that the committee favorably report S. 1863, the Profit Act, with the amendments in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Capito.
No.
Mr. Carden.
Aye.
Mr. Kramer.
Aye.
Mr. Fetterman.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Yes, by proxy.
Mr. Kelly. Aye. Ms. Lemon. Aye. Mr. Markey. Nope. Mr. Murphy. Aye. Mr. Mullins.
No by proxy.
Mr. Padilla.
No by proxy. No, excuse me, yes by proxy. Yes by proxy.
Mr. Ricketts.
No.
Mr. Sanders.
Yes by proxy.
Ms. Kavanaugh. Mr. Sullivan.
No by proxy.
Mr. Whitehouse.
Yes by proxy.
Mr. Wicker.
No by proxy.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to vote yes. And does anyone wish to change their vote? Senator Markey changes from no to aye. Anyone else wish to change their vote? All right, the clerk will report. All right, the yeas are 14, the nays are 5. The legislation is favorably reported. I note for the record that a quorum of the committee is present. Thank you. All right, we'll now consider S. 2781, the Good Samaritan Remediation of Abandoned Hardrock Mine Act of 2023, and the Kelly Lummis Amendment in the nature of substitute to this legislation. The amendment is in the nature of substitute, incorporates technical assistance from the EPA that has been agreed to on a bipartisan basis with the bill's sponsors. As the ranking member and I have agreed, I now ask unanimous consent to use the amendment in the nature of the substitute as a base text for the purposes of this business meeting. Is there objection? I hear no objection. The committee will use the Kelly Lummis substitute as a base text for purpose of committee's action on the Good Samaritan Act. As no other amendments were filed, I move to report S. 2781, the Good Samaritan Act of 2023, with the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opponents say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The legislation is favorably reported. I note for the record that a quorum of the committee is present. Senator Carden. Go ahead.
I just want to comment briefly on the bill we just passed. It provides for a pilot program for waivers to the Superfund rules and the Clean Water Act, and I don't think we should do that lightly. I want to compliment Senator Heinrich and Risch for the compromises that they were able to get and the protections that they have in this bill, and I applaud them for those efforts. But I do want to raise the issue that whenever we look at any type of a waiver from the Superfund rules or the Clean Water Act, we need to be extremely careful. There are other alternatives that could have accomplished these same goals. And I am concerned that we haven't explored those options as deeply as we should. For example, we could be looking at changes within the Superfund rules and Clean Water Act as it relates to reclamation activities and cleanup activities itself. Secondly, in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we provided under Section 4704 for authorization for funds for cleanup under the abandoned Hardrock Mine Reclamation Authority. And unfortunately, that was authorized at $3 billion. It's my understanding that our appropriators have recommended a $5 million. That's a far cry from what we intended under the bipartisan infrastructure bill in order to clean up these abandoned mines. And then lastly, we should be looking at the responsible parties. I know it's challenging, but they're the ones responsible for the cleanup. So I just really want to raise those cautionary tones. I did not oppose this being reported out by voice vote, but as this legislation works its way forward, I think we have to be extremely cautious about waivers to the Superfund rules or the Clean Water Act.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Senator Markey.
I would like to have myself associated with the remarks of the senator.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone else? All righty. Now I'm going to call up on block the following bills. S 3412, the Reuben E. Lawson Federal Building Act of 2023. S 3570, we're going to do these in block, yeah. S 3570, a bill to designate the U.S. Courthouse located at 500 West Pike Street in Clarksburg, West Virginia, as the Irene M. Keeley United States Courthouse, and the S 3577, a bill to designate the federal building located at 300 East 3rd Street in North Platte, Nebraska, as the Virginia Smith Federal Building. I move to report these naming bills favorably to the Senate. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. Depending on the chair, the ayes have it. The legislation is favorably reported. And I know for the record that a quorum of the committee is present. That concludes, Senator Capito, I think that concludes our business for today. And I want to thank everybody for helping to get us through this. We're a little bit rusty, but we closed strong. So I thank everybody for your help and participation. And that concludes the committee's votes as part of today's business meeting. And we thank everyone. I'll now recognize any member who would like to speak on any matter that we have voted on. Anybody like to speak? No, this is just, I'm sorry. Thank you for your offer, but this is just for the members. All right. In closing, I want to thank our members for being here today and voting on these important bills. For some final housekeeping, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record letters of support for the legislation our committee approved today. I also ask unanimous consent that the staff have the authority to make technical and conforming changes to the legislation approved today. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. And with that, this business meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.